The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III sat alone in his private study, staring at the official documents spread before him. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did in this moment. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached for his fountain pen, the same one his mother had given him decades ago when he was still the Prince of Wales. Outside his window, London was waking up to what would become one of the most shocking days in British royal history. Tourists were already gathering at the palace gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal standard flying above, completely unaware that their beloved monarchy was about to change forever. Charles closed his eyes and allowed his mind to drift back to the conversation that had brought him to this moment. It had been 3 weeks ago when his youngest son, Prince Harry, had walked into this very room with tears in his eyes and desperation in his voice. "Father," Harry had said, his voice breaking with emotion, "I need you to listen to me. Really listen." The king had looked up from his correspondence, noting the anguish written across his son's face. Despite all the public disagreements, despite the interviews and the memoir that had caused such pain to the family, Charles had never stopped loving Harry. He was still his little boy, the red-haired prince who used to climb into his father's bed during thunderstorms. "What is it, my son?" Charles had asked, setting aside his papers and giving Harry his full attention. Harry had struggled to find the words, pacing back and forth across the Persian rug that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth. "It's about William," he had finally said. "There are things you don't know. Things the family has kept hidden because we thought we were protecting the monarchy." Charles felt his heart skip a beat. His eldest son, William, the heir to the throne, had always been the golden child. Responsible, dutiful, everything a future king should be. What could possibly be so terrible that it would drive Harry to such distress? "William has been struggling," Harry continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than struggling. He's been having panic attacks, severe depression. Catherine has been covering for him, making excuses when he can't fulfill his duties. But, it's getting worse, father. Much worse." The revelation had hit Charles like a physical blow. He thought back to recent months, to William's increasingly pale complexion, the way his hands had shaken during public appearances that he had attributed to nerves, the dark circles under his eyes that makeup could barely conceal. "Why didn't he come to me?" Charles had asked, his voice filled with pain. "Because he's terrified of disappointing you," Harry replied. "He's terrified of disappointing the country. He's been self-medicating, father. Drinking heavily. Last week, Catherine found him passed out in his study with an empty bottle of whiskey and a note." Charles felt the world tilt beneath him. A suicide note. His son, his heir, had been contemplating taking his own life rather than face the burden of the crown. "Catherine destroyed the note," Harry continued, "but she's at her breaking point too. She's been holding everything together while watching the man she loves fall apart. Their children have started asking why Daddy cries so much." The image of his grandchildren, little George, Charlotte, and Louis, witnessing their father's breakdown was almost too much for Charles to bear. He had failed his son, just as he sometimes felt his own parents had failed him. "What does he need?" Charles had asked, already knowing the answer but hoping against hope there was another way. "He needs time, father. Real time. Away from the public eye, away from the pressure. He needs to heal, to find himself again. But, as long as he's the heir, as long as everyone's watching and waiting for him to become king, he'll never be free to do that." Charles had spent the next 3 weeks in agonizing deliberation. He had consulted with constitutional experts, with his private secretaries, with the Archbishop of Canterbury. The law was clear, the succession could be altered, but it required the monarch's consent and formal documentation. More importantly, he had long, painful conversations with William himself. His eldest son had initially refused to consider stepping back from the line of succession, insisting he could handle his responsibilities. But, when Charles gently mentioned Harry's concerns, William had broken down completely. "I dream about Mama," William had confessed through his tears. Every night, I dream about her, about how the pressure killed her. I wake up in cold sweats, terrified that I'm going to end up the same way. I can't eat, I can't sleep. Sometimes I look at George and wonder if I'm cursing him to the same fate. The comparison to Diana had shattered Charles's heart. His late wife had indeed struggled under the weight of royal expectations, and her death had been partly attributed to the relentless media pressure that came with being part of the royal family. What if we found another way? Charles had suggested gently. What if you could have the time you need to heal, without the weight of future kingship hanging over you? William had looked up with hope in his eyes for the first time in months. Is that possible? There are precedents, Charles had explained. Not many, but they exist. If you truly believe this is what you need. I do, William had said without hesitation. Father, I love this country, I love our family, but I can't be king. Not like this. Maybe not ever. Now, sitting in his study with the succession documents before him, Charles understood that this decision would shock the world. The media would go into overdrive. Constitutional experts would debate endlessly. The public would demand explanations that he could never fully give without betraying his son's privacy. But none of that mattered more than William's life, than his mental health, than giving him the chance to be a father and husband without the crushing weight of future kingship destroying him from within. Charles picked up his pen and began to read through the legal language one more time. The document was surprisingly simple in its wording, despite the complexity of its implications. By signing it, he would formally remove William from the line of succession, making Harry the heir to the throne instead. The irony wasn't lost on him. Harry, who had spent years trying to escape the royal family, who had moved to America and stepped back from royal duties, would now be called upon to return and prepare for a role he had never wanted. But, in their recent conversations, Harry had surprised his father with his willingness to accept this responsibility. If this is what William needs, Harry had said, then, I'll do whatever it takes. I've learned a lot about myself these past few years, about what really matters. Maybe it's time I put that knowledge to use in service of the crown. Charles smiled slightly, remembering how proud he had been of Harry's maturity. His younger son had grown from the rebellious prince who had once been photographed in Nazi costume at a party, into a man of substance and compassion. Perhaps this was always meant to be their path. A gentle knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called. His private secretary, Sir Edward Young, entered with a grave expression. Your Majesty, the family members you requested are assembled in the blue drawing room. Charles nodded. He had asked William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan to be present when he signed the documents. This was too important, too life-changing, for him to do alone. And the press statement? Charles asked. Prepared and ready for release immediately after you sign, Your Majesty. We've coordinated with Downing Street, and the Prime Minister is standing by. Charles took a deep breath. In a few minutes, everything would change. The careful succession planning that had been in place since Elizabeth II's death would be turned upside down. The future of the monarchy would take an entirely different path. He gathered the documents and stood, his movements deliberate and measured. This was perhaps the most important decision he would make as king, and he wanted to remember every detail of this moment. As he walked through the corridors toward the blue drawing room, Charles passed portraits of his ancestors, monarchs who had faced their own impossible choices throughout history. Some had chosen duty over personal happiness. Others had chosen love over the crown. Today, he was choosing his son's well-being over tradition and public expectation. The blue drawing room fell silent as he entered. William sat in a chair by the window, Catherine's hand in his, both of them looking pale but determined. Harry and Meghan stood nearby, their faces solemn with the gravity of the moment. Are we all ready? Charles asked, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. William nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Thank you, Father. For understanding. For giving me this chance. Charles moved to the ornate writing desk that had been prepared for the signing. The documents lay open, waiting for his signature to change the course of British history. He thought about his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and what she would have made of this moment. She had been a woman of duty above all else, but she had also been a mother and grandmother who understood the price that service extracted from those who wore the crown. Your great-grandmother would have understood, he said to William, as if reading his thoughts. She knew that sometimes the greatest service to the crown is knowing when to step aside. With that, Charles signed his name with careful, deliberate strokes. The ink dried quickly, but the implications would last forever. As soon as the last letter was complete, Sir Edward stepped forward to witness the signature and begin the process of formally announcing the change to the world. It's done, Charles said quietly. The room remained silent for a long moment as the weight of what had just happened settled over them all. Then, William stood and embraced his father, his shoulders shaking with relief and gratitude. I love you, Papa, William whispered, using the childhood name he hadn't spoken in years. I love you too, my boy, Charles replied, holding his son close. Now you can heal. Now you can live. Harry stepped forward next, and, for the first time in years, the brothers embraced without the weight of rivalry or resentment between them. Are you ready for this? William asked his younger brother. Harry managed a small smile. No. But, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in one quiet room in Buckingham Palace, the future of their monarchy had just been rewritten with a few strokes of a pen and the infinite love of a father for his struggling son. The announcement hit the airwaves at precisely 3 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. BBC News interrupted regular programming, and, within minutes, every major news network around the world was scrambling to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. This is unprecedented in modern royal history, declared royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine shock. King Charles has formally altered the line of succession, removing Prince William and making Prince Harry the heir to the throne. In homes across Britain, people stopped what they were doing and stared at their television screens in disbelief. Pub conversations ground to a halt. Office workers clustered around computers, refreshing news websites that were struggling to keep up with the traffic. The official statement from Buckingham Palace was brief and carefully worded. His Majesty King Charles III has today signed documents altering the line of succession to the throne. Prince William will step back from his role as heir apparent to focus on his young family and personal well-being. Prince Harry will return to the United Kingdom to assume his new responsibilities as heir to the throne. The King asks for privacy and understanding during this transition period. But, the brevity of the statement only fueled more speculation. Social media exploded with theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Hashtags like #RoyalShakeup and #WhatHappened began trending worldwide within the hour. At Anmer Hall, William and Catherine sat together on their sofa, watching the news coverage with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Their children were playing in the garden, blissfully unaware that their father was no longer destined to be king. Do you think we made the right choice? Catherine asked, her hand resting on William's arm. William took a shaky breath. For the first time in months, the constant tightness in his chest had begun to ease. The panic attacks that had plagued him for nearly a year seemed to have lifted, replaced by something he hadn't felt in so long he had almost forgotten what it was like, peace. Look at them, he said, nodding toward the window where George, Charlotte, and Louis were chasing each other around the oak tree that had stood in their garden for centuries. When was the last time you saw me play with them like that? Really play, without checking my phone every 5 minutes or worrying about the next engagement? Catherine followed his gaze and realized he was right. William had been so consumed by anxiety and depression that he had become a ghost in his own home. The children had started asking her why Daddy was always sad, why he didn't laugh at their jokes anymore, why he spent so much time locked in his study. "I want to be their father," William continued, his voice growing stronger. "Really be their father. Not just the man who's preparing to be king while they grow up around me. George doesn't need the burden of knowing he'll be king someday, not yet. Let him be a little boy for as long as possible." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan were preparing for a life-changing journey back to the United Kingdom. Their modest home in Montecito, California, buzzed with activity as they tried to process what had just happened. "Are you sure about this?" Meghan asked for the 100th time, watching Harry pace their living room. "We've built a life here. Archie and Lilibet are happy. We're happy." Harry stopped pacing and looked at his wife, the woman who had stood by him through the most difficult period of his life. "I know," he said softly. "And I know I'm asking you to give up everything we've worked for. But William needs this, Meghan. He's drowning, and I'm the only one who can throw him a lifeline." Meghan moved to him and took his hands in hers. "Then, we go," she said simply. "But we do it our way this time. No more hiding who we are to make other people comfortable." The couple had learned hard lessons during their previous time as working royals. The pressure, the scrutiny, the impossible standards had nearly destroyed their marriage and their mental health. But they were different people now, stronger, more sure of themselves. "The monarchy needs to change," Harry said, thinking out loud. "Maybe this is how it happens. Maybe having someone who's lived outside the system, who's experienced real life, can help modernize it." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the window, they could see a crowd of reporters gathering at their gate, telephoto lenses pointed at their home. "It's starting," Meghan said with a sigh. "No," Harry corrected, pulling her close. "It's starting differently. This time, we control the narrative." Back in London, the political implications of Charles's decision were beginning to ripple outward. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had been given only hours' notice of the king's intention, barely enough time to consult with constitutional experts and prepare for the inevitable questions from Parliament. "The government supports His Majesty's decision," Sunak announced from Downing Street, flanked by security officers as protesters and supporters began to gather. "The succession to the throne is a matter for the monarch and the royal family. Our constitutional monarchy remains strong and stable." But, privately, Sunak was deeply concerned. The monarchy was supposed to provide stability and continuity. This sudden change would have implications for everything from state visits to the line of succession for decades to come. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, found himself in an equally difficult position. As the senior bishop of the Church of England, he would be responsible for any future coronation ceremony. The last time the succession had been significantly altered was during the abdication crisis of 1936, and that had nearly brought down the monarchy entirely. "We must pray for wisdom and understanding during this time of change," Welby said in a hastily arranged press conference. "The royal family, like all families, faces challenges that require compassion and support from the entire nation." In the streets of London, public opinion was sharply divided. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds had gathered despite the late afternoon chill. Some held signs supporting William's decision, others expressed anger at what they saw as an abdication of duty. "He's supposed to be our future king," shouted Margaret Thompson, a pensioner who had travelled from Yorkshire specifically to voice her displeasure. "You don't just walk away from that responsibility." But, nearby, a younger woman named Sarah Mitchell offered a different perspective. "If he's struggling with his mental health, then, he's doing the brave thing," she told a reporter. "We've all seen what the pressure of royal life can do. Look what happened to Diana." The mention of Princess Diana sent a ripple through the crowd. The People's Princess had died nearly 3 decades ago, but her memory still cast a long shadow over the royal family. Many in the crowd began to nod thoughtfully, remembering the relentless media pressure that had contributed to her tragic end. Inside the palace, King Charles was meeting with his senior advisors, trying to plan for the weeks and months ahead. The decision had been made, but the implementation would be enormously complex. The logistics alone are staggering, Sir Edward Young explained, consulting a thick folder of documents. Prince Harry will need to be brought back into the fold gradually. Security arrangements, accommodation, staff assignments. And then, there's the matter of his American citizenship status. Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his decision settling in. What about public opinion? Mixed, as expected, reported the palace's communications director. The younger demographics seem more understanding, particularly regarding mental health issues. Older generations are more skeptical. But, the international response has been surprisingly positive. Indeed, around the world, the story was being framed differently than it might have been in previous decades. Mental health awareness had grown significantly in recent years, and many international outlets were praising the royal family for prioritizing well-being over tradition. It's a sign of a modern monarchy, commented CNN's royal correspondent. One that recognizes that even those born to privilege are human beings with human struggles. The French press, traditionally skeptical of the British monarchy, was even more direct in its support. Finally, a royal family that chooses love over duty, declared Le Figaro's front page. As evening fell over London, the immediate shock began to wear off, replaced by deeper questions about what this change would mean for the future. In Parliament, MPs from all parties were demanding an emergency session to discuss the constitutional implications. This isn't just about one family, argued Labour MP Sarah Jones during an impromptu interview. This affects every citizen of the United Kingdom. We need answers about how this decision was made and what safeguards exist to prevent future disruptions to the succession. Conservative MP James Harrison took a different view. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances. King Charles has made a difficult but courageous decision to protect his family while preserving the institution. The debate would continue for weeks, but one thing was becoming clear: this was not just a personal decision by one family, but a moment that would define the monarchy for generations to come. In his private apartments, William was having dinner with Catherine and the children for the first time in weeks without checking his phone or cutting the meal short for royal duties. For the first time since becoming heir to the throne, he felt like he could breathe. "Daddy, why were there so many people with cameras outside?" 9-year-old George asked between bites of his fish and chips. William and Catherine exchanged glances. They had agreed to tell the children the truth in age-appropriate terms, but it was still difficult to find the right words. "Well," William began carefully, "you know how Daddy was supposed to be king someday." After Grandpa Charles, Charlotte chimed in, always eager to show off her knowledge of family hierarchy. "That's right. But I've decided that Uncle Harry should be king instead. So Daddy can spend more time with you and Mummy, and we can just be a normal family." 6-year-old Louis looked confused. "But I thought princes had to be kings." "Not always," Catherine explained gently. "Sometimes people choose different paths. And that's okay." George, being older, seemed to understand the implications better. "Does this mean I won't be king either?" "Not unless something changes," William said, relief evident in his voice. "You can be whatever you want to be, George. A doctor, a teacher, a footballer. Anything that makes you happy." For the first time in months, William saw his eldest son's face light up with genuine excitement. "Can I really be a footballer?" "If that's what you want," William laughed, and Catherine realized it was the first time she had heard her husband laugh in almost a year. Across the city, in a small flat in South London, Harry's former protection officer, Mark Stevens, was watching the news with his wife. Stevens had been part of Harry's security detail for 5 years and had seen firsthand how the prince had struggled with royal life before stepping back. "Do you think he can do it?" Stevens' wife asked. "Be king, I mean." Stevens considered the question carefully. He had watched Harry mature from a rebellious young man into a thoughtful father and husband. He had seen him work tirelessly for causes he believed in, even when it brought criticism from the media and the public. If anyone can modernize the monarchy, Stephen said finally, it's him. He's seen life from both sides now. He knows what it's like to be royal, and he knows what it's like to be human. The observation would prove to be prophetic. In the days to come, Harry's unique perspective would indeed begin to reshape how the royal family interacted with the public, the media, and each other. But, first, he and his family would have to navigate the complex process of returning to a life they had once fled, hoping that this time, they could find a way to serve the crown without losing themselves in the process. 3 weeks after the historic announcement, Harry and Meghan's private jet touched down at Heathrow Airport under a grey October sky. The media circus that greeted them was unlike anything they had experienced before, even during their dramatic exit from royal life 4 years earlier. This time, however, they were prepared. Harry had insisted on a different approach to media relations, one that acknowledged their new role while maintaining the boundaries they had fought so hard to establish in California. "We do this on our terms," Harry had told his father during one of their lengthy phone conversations. "I'll serve the crown, but I won't sacrifice my family's well-being or my own sanity in the process." King Charles had agreed, understanding that his younger son's conditions were not negotiable. The monarchy needed Harry more than Harry needed the monarchy, and everyone involved understood this fundamental shift in power dynamics. At Windsor Castle, preparations had been underway for weeks to accommodate the returning family. The Royal Lodge, previously occupied by Prince Andrew, had been extensively renovated to provide Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet with the privacy and security they would need while still allowing Harry to fulfill his new duties as heir. "It feels strange being back," Meghan admitted to Harry as their convoy made its way through the familiar countryside toward Windsor. "Like returning to a dream that turned into a nightmare, hoping it might be different this time." Harry squeezed her hand, understanding completely. The last time they had driven this route together, they had been fleeing, desperate to escape the suffocating restrictions and hostile media coverage that had made their lives unbearable. "We're stronger now," he said, as much to reassure himself as her. "We know who we are. We know what we won't compromise on." Their children, now 5 and 3 years old, were experiencing England for the first time as their primary home. Archie had vague memories of their previous visits, but, for little Lilibet, everything was new and exciting. "Will we see Grandpa Charles?" Archie asked, his face pressed against the car window as they passed through the gates of Windsor Castle. "Yes, sweetheart," Meghan replied. "And Uncle William and Aunt Catherine, and your cousins George, Charlotte, and Louis." The family reunion that awaited them would be both healing and challenging. William had spent the past 3 weeks in intensive therapy, working through the anxiety and depression that had brought him to his breaking point. The relief of no longer being heir had been immediate and profound, but the work of rebuilding his mental health was ongoing. "I owe Harry everything," William had confided to Catherine just that morning. "He saved my life, and probably our marriage too." Catherine had nodded, remembering the dark months when she had felt like she was losing her husband to an invisible enemy. The man who had proposed to her with such confidence and joy had gradually disappeared, replaced by someone consumed with worry and self-doubt. Now, for the first time in over a year, William seemed like himself again. He was laughing with the children, sleeping through the night, eating regular meals. The transformation had been remarkable and swift once the pressure of future kingship had been lifted from his shoulders. "I just want to thank him properly," William continued. "I don't think I've ever told him how much I love him, how much I've missed him." The brothers' relationship had been strained for years, dating back to Harry's marriage to Meghan and the subsequent media coverage that had painted them as rivals. The situation had worsened after Harry and Meghan's explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey, which had accused the royal family of racism and neglect. But the crisis of William's mental health had stripped away years of resentment and misunderstanding. When Harry had flown to London 3 weeks ago to check on his brother, they had talked honestly for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," William had said through his tears. "I'm sorry I didn't support you and Meghan. I'm sorry I let the system turn us against each other. We both made mistakes," Harry had replied. "But, we're family. That has to count for something." Now, as Harry's car pulled up to the main entrance of Windsor Castle, William was waiting on the steps, flanked by Catherine and their children. The scene would have been photographed extensively if the media had been allowed access, but Harry had insisted on privacy for this first meeting. When Harry stepped out of the car, the brothers looked at each other for a long moment before William stepped forward and embraced him tightly. "Thank you," William whispered. "Thank you for coming home." "Thank you for letting me help," Harry replied, his own voice thick with emotion. The children's reunion was less complicated and infinitely more joyful. George, Charlotte, and Louis had missed their uncle and aunt, and they welcomed Archie and Lilibet with the enthusiasm of children who didn't understand the complex politics that had kept their families apart. "Can we show them the secret passages?" Charlotte asked excitedly, already taking Archie's hand. After tea, Catherine laughed, and Meghan felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was what she had hoped for when they first joined the royal family, this sense of belonging and warmth that had been so elusive during their first attempt at royal life. King Charles appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of his reunited family. At 76, he was acutely aware that time was precious, and seeing his sons together again filled him with a joy he hadn't expected to feel. "My boys," he said simply, embracing both of them. "My family." The following weeks would be a careful balance of private family time and public preparation for Harry's new role. Unlike his previous stint as a working royal, this time Harry would have significant input into how his duties were structured. "I want to focus on the causes that matter," he explained during his first meeting with palace officials. "Mental health, veterans affairs, environmental conservation, and supporting marginalized communities. I'm not interested in ribbon cuttings and ceremonial duties just for the sake of keeping busy." The palace staff, many of whom had worked with Harry during his previous royal career, were impressed by his clarity and purpose. The young man who had once been directionless and rebellious had returned with a clear vision for how he wanted to serve. "He's different," observed Sir Edward Young after the meeting. "More focused, more confident in his own judgment. The time away has been good for him." Meghan, meanwhile, was navigating her own complex return to royal life. The Duchess who had been vilified by the British tabloids was now being cautiously welcomed back, partly because of her husband's new status but also because public opinion had shifted in her favor during their time in America. "I'm not the same person who left," she told a small group of palace staff during her own orientation meeting. "I have boundaries now, and I have experience. I know what I can and can't accept." Her approach to royal duties would be markedly different from traditional royal women. She planned to maintain her podcast and her advocacy work, adapting them to complement her new royal role rather than abandoning them entirely. "The monarchy needs to evolve," she explained. "People want authenticity, they want to see real impact. I can help provide that." Meanwhile, William was discovering what life could be like without the constant pressure of preparing to be king. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt free to make choices based on what would make him happy rather than what was expected of him. "I want to become a full-time air ambulance pilot again," he told Catherine one evening as they watched their children play in their garden. "I want to do something that feels meaningful, where I can actually help people directly." Catherine smiled, remembering how passionate William had been about his previous work as a helicopter pilot with the East Anglian Air Ambulance. He had been happiest during those years, when he could be just William Wales, not Prince William the future king. "The children would love that," she said. "They love hearing your flying stories." The conversation highlighted one of the unexpected benefits of the succession change. George, Charlotte, and Louis would now grow up as relatively normal royal children, with titles but without the crushing weight of future kingship hanging over them. "George asked me yesterday if he could be a footballer when he grows up," William shared, still amazed by the simplicity of the question. "I told him he could be anything he wanted." Do you know how good it felt to say that and mean it? Public opinion about the succession change was slowly but steadily shifting in favor of the family's decision. The initial shock and outrage had given way to a more nuanced understanding of the human cost of royal duty. A poll conducted by YouGov 3 weeks after the announcement showed that 58% of Britons now supported William's decision to step back from the succession, with younger demographics showing even stronger support. "People understand mental health struggles in a way they didn't even 10 years ago," explained polling expert Professor Jane Mitchell. "The idea that someone would sacrifice their well-being for duty doesn't resonate the way it once did." The international response had been even more positive. Harry and Meghan's high profile in America had generated significant sympathy for their return to royal duty, with many viewing it as a sacrifice they were making for family. "They had the perfect life in California," observed American royal correspondent Omid Scobie. "The fact that they're giving that up to help William and serve the British people shows incredible character." As autumn turned toward winter, the new arrangement began to settle into a routine. Harry gradually took on more public engagements, each one carefully chosen to align with his values and interests. His first major speech as heir apparent, delivered at a mental health conference in Manchester, was widely praised for its honesty and relatability. "I've struggled with my own mental health," he had said, looking directly at the audience rather than reading from notes. "I've needed help, I've sought therapy, I've had dark moments when I questioned everything about my life. If sharing that struggle can help even one person feel less alone, then it's worth the vulnerability." The speech went viral on social media, with mental health advocates praising Harry for his openness and authenticity. It was exactly the kind of modern, accessible monarchy that constitutional experts had been saying the institution needed to survive. Meanwhile, William was beginning his new life as a private citizen who happened to be a prince. His return to air ambulance work had been approved, and he was scheduled to begin training for his new position after the Christmas holidays. "I feel like I'm getting my brother back," Harry had confided to Meghan one evening. The real William, not the one who was being crushed by the weight of future kingship. The transformation in both brothers was remarkable. Harry seemed more grounded and purposeful, while William appeared lighter and more genuinely happy than he had been in years. "Maybe this is how it was always supposed to be," Meghan observed. "Maybe the universe just had to shake things up to get everyone where they needed to be." As 2024 drew to a close, the royal family gathered at Sandringham for their traditional Christmas celebration. For the first time in years, all the key players would be present and, more importantly, at peace with each other and their respective roles. The British monarchy, one of the world's oldest institutions, had proven once again its capacity for adaptation and renewal. Sometimes, the greatest acts of service required not the sacrifice of personal happiness, but the courage to choose a different path entirely. 1 year after the historic succession change, the Christmas morning service at St. Mary Magdalene Church near Sandringham Estate had become a symbol of the royal family's transformation. As snow fell gently on the ancient churchyard, crowds of well-wishers gathered to catch a glimpse of the family that had captivated the world with their courage to choose healing over tradition. King Charles walked slowly toward the church entrance, his arm linked with Camilla's, both of them radiating a contentment that had been absent during the tumultuous early years of his reign. Behind them, Harry and Meghan walked hand in hand, their children skipping alongside their cousins in a scene that would have been unimaginable just 18 months earlier. William and Catherine brought up the rear of the procession, and observers noted how relaxed and genuinely happy William appeared. The haunted look that had marked his features during his final months as heir apparent had been replaced by a genuine smile and an easy confidence that spoke of a man who had found his true path. "Uncle Harry, will you tell us about the helicopters after church?" young Louis called out, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp winter air. "Of course, buddy," Harry laughed, ruffling his nephew's hair. "But only if you promise to sit still during the service." The easy banter between uncle and nephew exemplified the healing that had taken place within the family. The children, who had once been confused by the tension between the adults, now moved freely between both households, secure in the love and stability that surrounded them. Inside the church, the royal family took their traditional places in the front pews, but there was nothing traditional about the dynamics between them. Harry and William sat together, occasionally whispering and sharing quiet laughs like the brothers they had always been meant to be. Meghan and Catherine had developed a genuine friendship based on their shared experience of navigating royal motherhood and supporting their husbands through difficult transitions. As the Archbishop of Canterbury began his Christmas sermon, his words seemed particularly relevant to the family's journey over the past year. Sometimes, he said, his voice carrying throughout the packed church, the greatest acts of faith require us to trust that change, even dramatic change, can lead to renewal and hope. When we choose love over obligation, understanding over judgment, we open ourselves to possibilities we never imagined. Harry squeezed Meghan's hand, thinking about how dramatically their lives had changed. A year ago, they had been settled in California, building their independent life far from royal expectations. Now, he was heir to the throne, preparing for a role he had never wanted but had come to embrace with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The transition had not been without challenges. Harry's first year as heir apparent had included several missteps as he learned to navigate the delicate balance between modernizing the monarchy and respecting its traditions. His decision to speak openly about his therapy sessions had sparked controversy among traditionalists, while his insistence on maintaining his American connections had drawn criticism from some quarters. But, public opinion polls consistently showed strong support for his approach. Young people, in particular, appreciated his authenticity and willingness to address difficult topics that previous generations of royals had avoided. "He's like a regular person who happens to be royal," 18-year-old university student Emma Thompson had told a BBC interviewer. "He talks about real problems and doesn't pretend everything is perfect. That's what we need from our future king." Meghan, too, had found her rhythm in her new role. Her return to royal duties had been carefully managed, focusing on causes she was passionate about rather than the ceremonial obligations that had felt so meaningless during her first stint as a working royal. Her documentary series about mental health in marginalized communities had won critical acclaim and had been credited with opening important conversations about inequality in mental health care. Her work with veterans' families had complemented Harry's military advocacy perfectly, and, together they had created a powerful platform for addressing issues that mattered to them. "She's not trying to be someone she's not anymore," observed royal biographer Penny Junor. "She's bringing her authentic self to the role, and that's making all the difference." As the church service concluded and the family prepared to walk back to Sandringham House for their Christmas lunch, William felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The panic attacks that had once overwhelmed him were a distant memory. His work as an air ambulance pilot gave him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that no amount of royal ribbon-cutting had ever provided. "Any regrets?" Catherine had asked him just that morning as they watched their children excitedly preparing for Christmas. "None," William had replied without hesitation. "I get to save lives during the week and come home to my family every night. Harry gets to be the public face of the monarchy and do work that changes the world. Charles gets to see both his sons happy and fulfilled. How could I regret any of that?" The family's Christmas lunch at Sandringham was a joyous affair, filled with the kind of relaxed conversation and genuine laughter that had been absent from royal gatherings for years. The children performed a small play they had written themselves about brave knights and clever princesses, with 5-year-old Lilibet stealing the show as a dragon who decides to become a vegetarian. "She definitely gets her dramatic flair from her mother," Charles chuckled to Harry as they watched Meghan help their daughter with her costume changes. "And her determination," Harry added with pride. "She's going to change the world, that one." As afternoon turned to evening, Harry found himself alone in the library with his father, both men nursing glasses of whiskey and reflecting on the extraordinary year they had shared. "Are you happy with how things have worked out?" Charles asked, his voice quiet with emotion. Harry considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure happy is the right word," he said finally. "This isn't the life I would have chosen for myself or for my children. But, seeing William healthy again, seeing our family together, knowing that we're building something better for the future. Yes, I think I'm at peace with it." Charles nodded, understanding the complexity of his son's feelings. "Your mother would be proud of you both," he said. "She always said that the monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to adapt and serve the people's needs." "I think about her a lot," Harry admitted. "About how the system failed her, how it nearly failed William. I'm determined to make sure it doesn't fail anyone else." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of William, who joined them with his own glass and settled into one of the worn leather armchairs that had been in the library for decades. "The children are finally asleep," he announced. "Although I think George might be too excited about tomorrow to actually rest." "Some things never change," Charles smiled, remembering his own son's Christmas excitement at that age. "But, some things do," William said, his tone more serious. "I've been thinking about what we've accomplished this year, what we've learned." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I used to think that duty meant sacrifice, that serving the crown required giving up everything that made me happy. But, watching Harry this year, seeing how he's approached this role, I realize that the best service comes from authenticity, not sacrifice." Harry looked at his brother with surprise and gratitude. "That means a lot coming from you." "I mean it," William continued. "You've shown that it's possible to be royal and human at the same time. You've proven that the monarchy can evolve without losing its essence." The three men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this point. "What do you think the next year will bring?" Charles asked eventually. "More challenges," Harry said honestly. "The press will never be completely satisfied, Parliament will always have questions, and there will always be people who think we should do things differently. But, also more opportunities," William added. "Harry's engagement with young people is already changing how they see the monarchy. Meghan's work is highlighting issues that need attention. The whole family feels more purposeful now." Charles raised his glass. "To family," he said simply. "To family," his sons echoed, and, in that moment, the weight of the past year's struggles and triumphs seemed to crystallize into something precious and permanent. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Norfolk countryside, blanketing the estate in peaceful white. In houses across Britain and around the world, families were gathering for their own Christmas celebrations, many of them talking about the royal family that had shown them that it was possible to choose love over duty, healing over tradition, and authenticity over expectation. The British monarchy, an institution that had survived wars, revolutions, and countless personal scandals, had proven once again that its greatest strength lay not in its adherence to rigid tradition, but in its capacity for renewal and growth. As midnight approached and Christmas Day gave way to Boxing Day, Harry stood at the window of his childhood bedroom, looking out over the estate where he had played as a boy, where he had struggled as a young man, and where he had now found his purpose as heir to the throne. Meghan joined him, slipping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his shoulder. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Harry thought about their life in California, about the freedom they had enjoyed and the peace they had found. Then, he thought about William's transformation, about their children growing up surrounded by loving family, about the work they were doing to create positive change. "No regrets," he said finally, and meant it completely. In the distance, the lights of Sandringham House glowed warmly against the winter darkness, a symbol of continuity and change intertwined. Inside, a king rested peacefully, knowing that he had chosen his son's well-being over public expectation and had been rewarded with a stronger, more united family than he had ever imagined possible. The succession crisis that had begun with one father's love for his struggling son had evolved into a transformation that would define the monarchy for generations to come. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most profound changes begin not with grand gestures or public declarations, but with the simple decision to put family first and trust that everything else will follow. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another year, the royal family slept peacefully under one roof for the first time in over a decade, secure in the knowledge that they had found their way back to each other and, in doing so, had found a new way forward for the crown they served.